Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Local Matters podcast of Georgia. Today, we are going to talk about the topic of political and social division in our country as well as here locally in the Augusta area. We find ourselves at a time where it appears that people act intentionally to maintain division and to promote division. And we're going to talk about how we can act more intentionally to avoid those divisions and bring ourselves closer together. Our guest today has spoken on this, researched this on a national level, and I certainly hope that you enjoy our conversation. If you do, please subscribe to the Local Matters Podcast of Georgia on our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Instagram so that you receive notifications when we post new episodes and other information. This episode is brought to you by Janice Allen Jackson and Associates. And if you'd like to learn more about me or services provided through the firm, please go to janiceallenjackson.com, which is our new and refreshed website. Thanks so much for being a part of the Local Matters podcast family. Local Matters family, today we are joined by Ms. Shannon Watson. She is the founder and executive director of Majority in the Middle. How are you doing today, Shannon?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Appreciate it. I appreciate your interest in the Local Matters podcast of Georgia. Sometimes we focus on topics that are hyper local here in the Augusta area, which is where I'm based. And sometimes we focus on statewide topics because both local and state government topics are sort of mysteries to people. I don't think folks get it a lot of times, which is our primary purpose. And then other times we may have a topic that focuses on local and state government, but is germane anywhere in the country. And I see your show today is one of those. So we appreciate your presence here. It is our tradition to have you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and Majority in the Middle. Can you tell me what that is?
I can. I have been working in state and local politics and political campaigns for most of my life now. I am a Minnesotan by choice. I'm a Kansan by birth. So the longer that you and I talk, the more Southern is going to creep into my voice because, anytime my partner can always tell when I have been on the phone with my parents because I get that little twang back, and so that's sort of home to me. So Majority in the Middle, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We work a lot on civic education, demystifying government. We give people in the middle a place to gather, sort of outside the back and forth of two extremes. We do a lot of work trying to elevate the voices of people who are modeling the behavior we want to see. We like carrots, not sticks. And then we're working on sort of systemic ways to bring a little more civility and a little less partisanship to our politics.
And those are very, very important things. This actually kind of ties in with a conversation I had with a gentleman named Paul Johnson. He's an author and podcaster as well. And that had a lot to do with our conversation. His podcast is The Optimistic American, and his book is What's Right with America.
Yeah.
And we really focused on how we take uh, the labels out of our conversations in order to improve our public discourse. As I hear you talk about the majority in the middle, do you still feel like there is a majority in the middle? Because it seems like we're so fragmented and folks have really become polarized, on the opposite ends of the spectrum. What do you think?
I think there is an enormous middle. I think we don't hear from it all that often. Because, the louder the voices on the fringes are, the less people in the middle who are, whether they are moderate. That's one of the things we had to sort of confront early on is like, what is the definition of middle? And we sort of let people define that for themselves. And we found there was kind of three groups. So the first one is people who, are on the left or the right, but they consider themselves moderate and thus kind of in the middle.
Mhm.
There are people like me who I hold some positions that line up with Democrats and some positions that line up with Republicans. I used to say that I'm not on anybody's team. Now I say I'm on everybody's team because I can pretty much find something to agree with anybody about. I can also find something to disagree with everybody about, but I tried to, focus on the positive. And then there are people, which this was the group that was most surprising to me, and I think the most interesting, is people who are very sort of entrenched in their values. They are on the right or on the left. They are conservative or they are liberal, but they believe that governing, not necessarily campaigning, but governing is not necessarily about winning. It's about, reaching across the aisle, finding consensus, finding collaboration, and doing what's right for the most people, not just necessarily what's the most right for your party. So all of those people, I think they have space for nuance in their lives. They sort of see different perspectives and aren't afraid of that. Um, I don't know. So they don't get as much airtime. They definitely don't get like the way we do political media in this country, where we have, a pundit from the right and a pundit from the left. The middle isn't really represented in that sort of binary system. So I think there's a lot of people in the middle. They're just not loud.
They're not loud. And are we at a point where people are embarrassed to be loud if you're in the middle? Because it sometimes feels that way to me, that the centrist is looked down upon for
I do
being a
think so.
centrist.
I do think so. And part of this is like our nature as human beings. Human beings are sort of genetically coded to form in groups and out groups. And so like some of the tribalism that we talk about as being a problem in our country, that comes from a very human place. It's part of our evolution and it's part of, like uh, safety in numbers and those kind of things. It has just gone to an extreme, um, in that like if you're centrists are often it's really hard to speak in sound bites, because there is, differences and there's nuance and well, what about this and what about this and well, in this case, so it's harder to be loud as a centrist because you need the next 10 words.
Got it. And the soundbite, I think, is the key part here. So much of this
Yeah.
is driven by media, and obviously we need media, but I feel like I
Hmm.
have a love-hate relationship with it. And to some extent, of course, having a podcast, I'm part of media now.
Right.
But I have a love-hate relationship with it. Media is best when it shines the light on corruption and things
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
I think that was a major role early in journalism, was to be fair and balanced and honest
Yes.
about things when they weren't happening in the way that they were supposed to happen. So that is the best aspect of media. But it seems now, due to the need for advertising and all
Hmm.
those other economic factors, media is looking for the 10 or 15-second sound bite that doesn't necessarily fairly characterize an issue or a situation.
Right. Well, and in fairness, real journalism, and I'm talking about actual credentialed, journalism, has a bias towards fairness and it has a bias towards conflict. So, you say you can't have a good story without a conflict. So obviously they try to tell the story of, what the conflict is. And then the fairness bias comes in. So where you have to say, okay, well, if this side thinks this, what does the other side think about that? Um, and sometimes that elevates the conflict more than the thing that you're actually talking about. So I think and then of course, we've all developed the attention spans of, a golden retriever on steroids and squirrel and what's this thing. And I mean, I see it myself, the amount of time that my attention, is easily distracted, but we've got so much distractions now. So
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Looked at some of the topics that you present on, and you do speaking as well.
yes, yes.
Um, uh, One of the topics is why we're divided and what we can do about it, and that really caught my attention. And I'll give a backdrop again here locally in the Augusta area. We have had so much division among our boards.
Yeah.
We have boards, I mean, school board,
Hmm.
we're consolidated governments. I've only had one local government body, but there's division among them as well. And last year before, an issue came up uh, regarding the mayor's ability to vote. Because the way we're set
Mm.
up, got a 10-person council, but the mayor was the 11th person and didn't have the right to vote in the original charter.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, really interesting. So you had an even number of folks who had to get the 6 votes,
Yeah.
and the mayor could only vote in the event of a tie.
Okay.
And they would conveniently avoid having a tie because somebody would just walk off. Say, "Oops, excuse me, I got to go to the restroom." So
Right.
they would make sure that we never hit that 5-5 tie.
Mhm.
So the mayor asked the voters for the right to vote on every issue, and the voters approved that. And people saw that as a means of dealing with the division on our council
Oh.
or commission, their board of
Hmm.
commissioners. And, to some extent, yeah, but I also was disappointed. And in fact, I did an interview or two about this on local media. I was disappointed that, yeah, you can give the mayor a vote, but does that really deal with the root causes of the
Hmm.
division? Because now it may be easier to get something passed because you have an odd number,
Right.
but the division still remains.
Hmm.
Our school board is now in a situation, by the time this episode runs, they may have actually voted on a new superintendent, selected a new school superintendent, but I see division with that. I just and in our community, with
Hmm.
every major issue, you expect, everybody's not going to be on the right side, but it seems like we get into these bloody battles, and nobody looks good, and nobody's happy at the end of the process when these things happen. Um, what are some of the reasons that we see so much division, and what can we do about it?
Yeah. So that particular talk is I had the opportunity to do that for TEDx,
Mhm,
which was awesome. It grew out of a presentation that I was doing to a lot of Rotary clubs.
mhm.
Rotary with the four-way test, like
I'm
that
a
goes along very
Rotarian.
well.
Oh,
Yes. Um, uh, that sort of topic goes along very well with the four-way test
mhm,
for Rotarians. So that was sort of the basis of it. One of the things that, beyond that we're human and that we sort of group in and out, is like that's a very natural thing, and that is one of the root causes of division. Sometimes seeing um, what the geographic sort of situation is as well. We have started sorting ourselves. There's a great book by gosh, I can't remember his first name, but his last name's Florida, and it's The Big Sort, and it's about how Americans have been segregating ourselves, not necessarily along racial or socioeconomic lines, but by ideology over the past 20 years or so. And that creates some really harmonious communities. But it also creates these echo chambers where, all of your thoughts and your feelings and your opinions are reflected back at you, and to the point that you don't consider that there's a different idea. So the way that plays out in government is when you have people who are elected to represent specific geographic communities. They are often representing a lot of people who have the same kind of issues, the same opinions, and so they see it as kind of a mandate to represent the views of their constituents, as they should.
mhm.
But when all the constituents are sort of diametrically opposed, then that percolates up into our governmental bodies. Um, and so I think sometimes focusing on, because no elected official in this country is ever elected with 100% of the vote. I used to live, I live in Minnesota now, and I used to live in a House district where my state representative ran unopposed for like two elections in a row. And even she didn't get 100% of the vote. So there are always people in a community who did not vote for that person. Either they voted against them or they didn't vote. So I think sometimes focusing on how are you not only representing the people who voted for you, but how are you representing the people who voted against you? That can add some of that nuance and help, particularly in governmental bodies when we're debating issues that seem to have a strong position one way or the other.
And you know what? That is really something to think about. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but yeah, you still have some obligation to represent those folks who maybe didn't vote for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And how are you reflecting their interests? How are you um, making sure that their voice is heard? Because just being in the minority doesn't necessarily mean that your opinion or your perspective is less valid.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The other piece in Minnesota, all of our local elected offices, so county commission, city council, mayor, school board members, sheriff, those are all legally nonpartisan offices. They don't always function that way, but they're legally nonpartisan. And so actually the biggest challenge that we find working with local elected officials in that structure is that when they go door knock, to get elected, people ask them, okay, well, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And some of them will say, it's a nonpartisan office, so I am, I'm my own sort of personal thing doesn't filter in. And more often than not, they get looked at very suspiciously because voters use partisan affiliations as a shorthand. And even,
They do.
like how
Because it's so complicated. Because things are so complicated.
absolutely. And our attention spans are short, and we have so much that we are trying to deal with and keep up with, and everybody's lives are so full and so busy that sometimes you do need that shorthand to try to figure out, is this somebody that you can see representing you or not? So that's a little bit of an extra challenge there when we're talking about nonpartisan offices as well.
Okay. Same here in Georgia. At the local level, folks run on a nonpartisan
Mm,
basis, but everybody is still trying to figure out, well, what really is he? Is he a Republican? Is he a
right.
Democrat?
Yeah.
That sort of thing to sort of figure out if this is somebody that they may have something in common with, I think, or not. It makes it easier. There's such a burden to really hear people out, to ask the right questions. And that's hard for the average person to do, to ask the right
Absolutely.
questions to figure out if this person really is going to represent your best interest.
Right.
That's hard to do. One of the things that one of the groups I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and our Augusta alumni chapter has candidate forums every couple of
Uh-huh.
years when there are a lot of offices on the ballot for uh, to create opportunities for us to ask the right questions, ask good questions,
Mm-hmm.
so we can really hear from those individuals directly, as opposed to trying to read through labels and, the information you might pick up on the street.
Yes.
Let's
Yes.
really hear directly from them. And, we have it structured, we have it organized, and we, invite people to come in person. We have it on social media, live, run it live on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook and that sort of thing. So to make it a little bit easier for you to understand where
Right.
those candidates are really coming from.
Yeah. Well, and knowing what um what the person who is asking for your vote, what their job is also so important. I mean, you've worked in local government, so you know the difference between the jurisdictions of your local government, your state government, your federal government.
Mhm. Mhm.
Most people actually don't. They don't know the difference between, who is filling a pothole, who's in charge at the city level of doing that, and and tariff conversations at the federal level. Like they don't necessarily know the difference and where the lines are. So I think that's we do some what we call civic education for adults.
Mhm.
Some people like that term, some people don't. That's fair. But understanding who represents you and sort of what the boundaries of their office are so important, not only in being able to interact with the right level of government, because again, we're all so busy and we need to know who to complain to when the trash doesn't get picked up, but also when candidates are either unaware or aren't willing to make the differentiation between what's their job and what isn't, that kind of sets voters up for disappointment. So if you have somebody who is running and they are running for a local office, but all they're talking about is national and international issues, they actually don't have the power, as you know, like they don't have the power to change those things. And so they promise voters kind of a bill of goods that they can't deliver on. And then voters are like throw up their hands. They're like, well, we elect people and they don't actually represent us, or they don't change things or whatever. Sometimes that's not out of, not being passionate about something or not caring about something, but it's not their jurisdiction. And so I think that's a really important piece to know as well.
Yeah, and it's so hard to explain that. But yeah, and then when you explain it to them, sometimes they don't want to understand,
Yes, don't want to
like,
understand.
like
Yes.
potholes, for instance, and you say, well, that's a state road. I'm sorry, we don't do those. We at the local level
Mhm.
don't do those. One's a city street, the other's a state road, and they just want it fixed.
Right. Absolutely. Yes.
They just want it fixed.
And that's
They're
fair.
Yeah, and
Nobody
it's
likes a
fair.
pothole. Hmm.
They're paying taxes,
Hmm.
and that pothole is dangerous for their
Hmm.
vehicle, and
Hmm.
they just want it fixed. But yeah, it's so many lines and so many levels that I think it confuses everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And nobody gets to know everything. Nobody has the capacity to know everything. Even the smartest person like there are a lot of things that they don't know. So I think the idea that people don't want to ask questions because they feel stupid. We actually have an event series we called Silly Question Saturdays, and we bring people to government on a Saturday, and you wear like you go to the state capitol at the legislature, and you wear your jeans, and you're in a very relaxed environment in a building that is frankly designed to be intimidating. And we ask all we that's where we say, like, this is the time for those questions that you don't want to ask because you're like, oh, well, that's a silly question or that's a stupid question. Stupid question Saturday doesn't sound nearly as good as silly question Saturday. So that's why we call it silly question Saturday.
Mhm.
But people just they don't want to, and so we invite those opportunities. Like ask your basic question or ask the question that you've never. And we've been doing these events for a couple of years, and even like I worked at the state capitol. I've been in and around the building for about 15 years. And every time we host one of these things, I learn something about the building or about the process or about the people in it every single time. So I think that's one of the things that people can do um, if you want to participate in your government is be brave enough to ask the silly question.
As we talk about politics and how it's invaded everything, a couple of things I want to delve
Mm.
into. One is that some people are operating under the assumption that because of the nastiness, for lack of a better term, at the national level,
Hmm.
it has now bled down into our local politics, and that's one of the reasons that we see such acrimonious discourse. Do
Yes,
you think that really has anything to do with it?
I think it does when we as humans we have a tendency to stereotype and group again. When we look at a person in front of us and say, okay, well, this person is a Republican, so I'm going to hold them responsible for what congressional Republicans or the president is doing or whatever, just without knowing the person in front of us, without knowing their position on issues, without knowing what being a Republican means to them, or vice versa with Democrats. Like when there are two major parties and uh, uh, two major parties, and this just idea that's kind of it's a binary choice. It's you feel this way or you feel this way. When we do that, we tend to lump a lot of baggage, maybe, onto the person who's right in front of us, who has no idea what or no control over what Congress or the president is doing. And so I think that is just sort of a byproduct of being part of a really large party organization. But I think it's something that we can fight by being aware that that's sort of what we're doing and maybe doing a little less of it.
Uh, And another question I'd like to ask, just in terms of dealing with politics, it's everywhere. We can't
Yeah,
avoid
yeah,
it. It shows up in the workplace, our neighborhoods, our
yes.
churches,
Hmm.
even. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, our Rotary clubs are,
yeah,
yeah, everywhere.
how do we deal with that? Do you just avoid the conversation? I mean, what's the best strategy you think in order to deal with that when those political issues come up in all of those different settings?
I have sort of two rules that I live by. The first one is the rule of five, is that if you have somebody in your life that you need to be in relationship with, and you just can't get past the politics, find five things in your life that you have in common and just lean into those and don't have the political conversations. So your kids go to the same school, or you root for the same sports team, or you both like to fish, or what you like the same kind of TV shows. Lean into those things that may be superficial, may feel superficial, but those are really actually the building blocks of our relationships, is finding the commonalities between us. And that can make it a little easier to deal with the the political divisions. The other thing I think that is really important is to understand that, like, if you have a coworker that leans into what you would consider like conspiracy theories or crazy ideas or something, being kind to that person despite the crazy things that they think, um, does not mean that you endorse the crazy things that they think. And I think that's some of the things we have been shutting people out in order to deal with some crazy positions. Um, and that actually doesn't do us any good. Nobody has ever changed somebody's mind by exiting the relationship. And so, as much as you can, I think, let their crazy ideas be okay. If they run for office, don't vote for them, but just kind of let the crazy ideas be okay and lean into the other things.
Sounds like a basic respect sort of thing
Yeah,
to me.
absolutely.
Is yeah, your opinions, your thoughts may be different from mine, your experiences are different from mine, but you're you and I'm me, and that's
Hmm.
cool.
Yes. And we can learn things from each other, and just, I mean, even just this conversation that you and I have been having, and the conversation that we had before we started recording. Like, I have learned things from you on that have changed my way of thinking, my way of life, even if it's just by a little bit. And that is a benefit to the rest of my day, the rest of my week. I don't think that we understand how rich just getting somebody else's perspective on something, or somebody else's lived experience, or those kind of things actually benefit us. And then the next time, I have a question about, A, B, or C, I'm like, oh yeah, Janice knows all about that. I now know Janice. I can call and ask her, and I can be more educated on an issue.
Do you feel like a psychologist when you're giving out this advice? Because it seems like it's so much about human nature.
It is. And you know what? That actually makes me feel really good that it's not that we're divided because we're evil. It's not that we're divided because we're all sort of being controlled by puppeteer conflict engineers, which, I mean, we are. Like, there's a lot of that goes on. But just the fact that there's so much of this that is just part of being human is the real basis for it. That does make me feel good. And it puts, so man, any college freshman I get my hands on, I tell them, do not do education the way I did. Undergrad took me 11 years, start to
Really?
finish.
Uh-huh.
11 years. I took a little break in the middle, mainly because I ran out of student loan money. But and then I went when I went back, like, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was probably the kid who would have benefited from a gap year had that been a thing
Mhm.
when I got out of high school in 1993. But I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so I kept switching majors. And so by the time I got done, I wound up, I had so many credits, I wound up with a triple major in English, theater, and psychology, which made
Okay.
zero sense. You know, my dad asked me at graduation, like, what are you going to do with that? I'm like, I don't know. It only, you only connect the dots in looking back. And English theater psychology is actually a really good basis for political sort of stuff. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm glad you've made it work out for
Yes,
you because,
yes.
yeah, a lot of politics has to do with how people think and the psychology of people.
Yeah, as it
One other,
should.
yeah, as it
Yeah.
should. One other interesting thing that I note about you is that I guess you came to this naturally since you grew up in a household where one parent is a Democrat and the other one's a Republican.
Yes. Yes. My dad is a Republican, what I have started calling a legacy Republican. He's been a Republican for a very long time. There is a significant military tradition in his family, in that half of my family. And my mom is a Democrat or a libertarian, depending on the day and the issue, because she grew up in rural Kansas. And most of the Kansans have a little bit of a libertarian streak, no matter where they are on the rest of the ideological spectrum. So, yeah, so I learned literally bipartisanship like at the dinner table. And in June, they celebrated 55 years of marriage. And so, like, they make it work. And I have watched them every day of my life make it work. So, this idea that, you can't be in relationship with people who you don't vote the same as, that's really sort of a foreign concept to me, because I have this great example of how you can do it if you want to.
I think people today create a lot of artificial barriers, to be
Oh,
honest, because I've
mm-hmm.
actually seen that come up, as we're swiping on social media. It's like a Gen Z issue. Couples don't date
Yes,
because one's conservative and the other one's liberal. It's like, really? Have
right,
y'all heard of
right.
Mary Madeline and James Carville?
Exactly. Yes. Well, and when we boil issues down to moral absolutes, which I think is one of the things that we've been sort of speeding up the last several years. And I mentioned conflict engineers earlier. You know, sometimes the way that we feel about issues is because of, how other people frame them. And the best way to motivate people, particularly in a political sphere, is to make them angry or make them afraid, and then point towards the other group of people they should be angry or afraid because of. Um, and so that has had a really, I think, damaging effect on how we look at issues. We don't look at them as issues, we look at them as moral absolutes.
And when you mention anger and afraid, the
Yeah,
emotional ties, and we get all get
absolutely.
too emotionally tied up in this stuff sometimes, I think.
Yes, yes. And it's not always because we should, I mean, the person who has just blown a tire because they hit the pothole, like, yes, they are angry and they should be. The person who is angry because of the prioritization of which potholes we fill based on what they think there's some sort of hidden agenda behind, um, that I think is where we have gone, in a way that isn't actually helpful for talking about public policy.
There's one thing as we get prepared to close out, if there's one thing that you would like our listeners to know
Mm.
about what they can do to contribute to a more civil discourse, to break down the barriers of division, to help us all get along a little bit better.
Yes.
What would that one thing be?
One thing. Okay, so my friends who still work for political campaigns, hate it when I say this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Um, once an election is over, take down your yard sign. Most municipalities, most
Code
places,
enforcement likes that too.
yeah. Like when you take down most municipalities have a period of time where the yard signs can be up.
Mhm.
And there's a good reason for this beyond sort of aesthetically what it looks like. It's because if you happen to live in a place where you and your neighbors would be voting for different people, leaving your yard sign up or flying a flag or doing whatever, with that candidate's branding on it, all that does is remind your neighbor across the street that you disagree. It highlights our divisions, and that shouldn't be the thing that your neighbor sees across the street about you or that you see about them. I mean, let's get mad about how tall the grass is instead of what your sign is, because most of those things are true. So that's my thing. If you only do one thing, which is not to say don't have yard signs to start with, but when the election is over, take them down.
Thank you so much. Like I said, code enforcement will love it. Um, from my
Yes.
local government days, that is one of the biggest things. It's like, Councilman so and so's yard signs are still up, and we're past that deadline.
Yes.
How do we approach him or her about this to
Yes.
make sure that the signs get taken down? Um, and of course, they're ugly and they, become litter, and
Right.
the next thing you know, they're going down a drain somewhere. Just
Yes.
it's
Or
terrible.
blocking the drain. And yes, the
Yes,
storm sewer
yes,
runs all over. Yes.
yes. It's just terrible. But okay, don't remind folks of what divides you.
Yeah,
Is your
absolutely.
advice?
Yeah.
Okay. Shannon Watson, thank you so much for being a guest on Local Matters. When you become a guest, you are joining our Local Matters podcast family. So thanks for now being a part of our family.
Absolutely. I very much enjoyed the conversation and appreciate the invitation.
I close with my favorite Bible verse, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. This show is designed to contribute to each of those, giving you the power that comes with knowledge, demonstrating love for your local community, and offering you wisdom for decision making so that you possess a sound mind when it comes to these topics. Please tune in to Local Matters next week as we drop new episodes every Wednesday on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and sometimes YouTube. Thanks so much for being a part of the Local Matters family.